So coming into your body, coming into your meditation posture, closing your eyes or just lowering your gaze. Letting the body soften. Relaxing the jaw. Letting go of the shoulders. Softening the belly. Mindfulness of the body, of the whole body, of being in a body. Is one of the most grounding and stabilizing practices. The body is solid, the body is mm, more distinct than the thoughts and feelings, more subtle. And connecting with the breath then allows us to have a very specific sensation to focus on. And so we use the breath and the body as a place to return to as the mind wanders. It's almost like putting a stake in the ground, trying to hold ourselves to that, tie ourselves to that stake. Well, good morning again, or whatever time of day it might be, wherever you are. This is not really ideal teaching circumstances. One discovers how important it is to be relaxed when teaching, and so I will do my best, but maybe let you guys help me out today. Just looking around at who's here. So we've been kind of jumping around with different topics as the moments arise that call for different reflections. I gave a talk on the refuges on the Friday after the election, and that's been kind of a persistent theme for me since then. But I am going to try to get back to step 5 a bit today. But it might turn out that step 5 is also a refuge. So I'm looking at my book, One Breath at a Time, on page 120, section called Breaking the Silence. And this is where I describe reading my inventory to my sponsor. And well, anybody who's been through that, and I hope you all have, know how powerful an experience that is. I'll read a little bit of it. I began to read, telling the story of my drinking, but also the history of pain in my life, the ways I had hurt people and been hurt, the girlfriend I had hit, the conflicts with my brothers, the battles with my parents, the bouts with depression, and more. Every sordid detail, or every one I could remember, from a life of drugs and alcohol, from years of frustration and failed ambition. I would stop to explain what I'd written, then continue on. Stephen nodded. Stephen, my sponsor's name in this book, not his real name. Stephen nodded and even laughed at these tragedies. He also told me that it was all familiar to him, that he'd done many similar things, and that the rest he'd heard from many others in meetings and inventories. I was not unique. This is the first revelation of step 5. When you expose your hidden secrets and shame to your sponsor, you learn that you aren't alone. Your failings are common, your shame unnecessary. When I walked out of Stephen's house into the warm Southern California sunshine, I felt a huge weight had lifted. The weight of self-hatred, the fear of discovery, the fear of admitting my imperfections. The weeks of inventory writing have been so difficult. I felt like I was pushing against something heavy, barely moving. But after reading all this to Stephen, the huge burden of fear rolled away. I drove home and collapsed on my bed. It's still a very strong memory. Again, something probably many of you understand, because it is such a sort of an exceptional thing to do. Not that it makes one exceptional to do it, but it's so outside the norms of how we live our lives typically, to be so honest and to expose that, and particularly when you've, as I say years of uh, drinking and drugging and all the behavior that went with that. But this is another one of those moments in the steps that's so remarkable. Um, it's that kind of mystery or that surprise of discovering that something that seemed so awful to talk about these things could be so freeing. And of course, it comes in the context of being sober. I'm not sure what it'd be like to do an inventory if you were still out there drinking and using. It'd probably send you to the bar very quickly to deal with it. But in that context, in that container of recovery, and the container of someone so compassionate and caring, who could listen with such kindness and forgiveness and understanding, that's all part of it, right? It's not something that's an isolated thing. My own story. I mean, each of us has our own, version of our story. It's, my story in terms of my early recovery. I didn't sort of start to work the program quickly. You know, I I think that my background in meditation, once I got sober, helped me to kind of get through the first year or so without being fully engaged in the step work. Um, but there was this kind of moment, change happens slowly, right? And then suddenly. But there was this moment where I realized I had to do it. I had to do that work, and then I knew I had to get a sponsor because I'd been thinking about, if I could say, working the first 3 steps for that first year, but that sense that this isn't going to really work if I don't do it all, and that I couldn't uh, even consider the 4th step seriously until I had someone to guide me with it. And so that all kind of tumbled out at once, that decision that I needed to really work this program, and then that I needed to work the 4th step, that I needed to get a sponsor. And he recognized all that immediately, and just said, well, if you got through a year sober, then you must have worked the first 3 steps. So time to do the 4th step. And, and I did it in this very sort of, not an organized way. But it was somewhat systematic. I just said, I'm going to write every day. And it was kind of like one day at a time, and I just wrote every night before I went to bed. I would write a page. That was kind of my commitment. And it took me months, probably 2 months to do that. And which means there was probably about 50 or 60 pages in there. And I don't know. I did not keep it, but and I talk later on in the book about how the timing that soon after that my father got a terminal diagnosis, and how important that turned out to be. But we'll hold off on that story. But this whole experience of learning what it means to be honest and letting go on that level, so important. I'm going to read a little bit more here. So before I did this step, I had the sense that my whole life would unravel if I pulled that little string of honesty. This is talking about, the fear of doing an inventory. What is this fear? Why do we struggle so hard to avoid showing others our failings? I don't know if I can really answer those questions, and I don't know if I have to. All I know is that I felt great fear and resistance to exposing myself to myself and to others. But once I did, there was great relief. For Buddhism and the 12 steps, this is enough to know because because these two traditions encourage us to act, not to figure everything out. They encourage us to change our lives through behavior, and that's what this step did for me. When Stephen had agreed to sponsor me a couple months earlier, one of the conditions was that I must share at meetings regularly. I'd cringed at this, but agreed. In my first year of sobriety, I'd barely raised my hand. Once I'd taken this step, my involvement in meetings became much easier. With nothing to hide, I could share without trepidation. Having seen the benefit, even the pleasure of letting go in this way, I wanted to share. And with the sharing came more connection as people came to know me better, and this acceptance from others grew into self-acceptance. It was as though my recovery had been supercharged. I began to feel tremendous energy and a new openness. I started to look at my personal history in new ways. With a more honest view of my past, it became easier to assess where I was in my life and what I might need to do to improve things. In Buddhist terms, I didn't feel so attached to my identity, in this case, my negative view of myself. And with this easing of attachment, new possibilities began to arise. If I wasn't limited to who and what I had been in the past, I could become anybody, couldn't I? For my own 12-step work, this new self-acceptance would prepare me for the difficult steps to come. I feel like there's a lot in these couple paragraphs that kind of a couple of different areas that I think are really relevant and interesting to me. Um, First of all, that feeling of having nothing to hide, that became really, really powerful and really important for me. And it's something where, when I can meet people casually and just tell them I'm a recovering alcoholic now, and um, not just hi, what's your name? My name's Kevin. I'm an alcoholic, but when circumstances arise, which they often enough do, if people ask me what I do for a living, it kind of comes up. I'm a professional alcoholic, or, but that was a joke. So I hope it was a joke. Um, but the benefit of that is that so often, like when I used to have a job where I had to go somewhere and be with people, um, and not just talk to them, but actually interact with them, I would often enough break my anonymity if it seemed appropriate. And so often that would lead to some other connection, either with them or something they knew someone, or there was somebody in their family. And so people would often come to me with questions, and you become a resource for people, just that honesty. So just out in the greater world, but in the program, of course, itself, it was when I started to share that I started to connect with people. And that was when so much changed. Um, just so interesting that, again, kind of going back to this question, what's this fear? Because this fear of self-revealing in the fifth step is pretty much the same fear of the first step of admitting, because the word admitting is in both steps. And that as I said, like my first year in recovery was like I admitted I'm an alcoholic to myself, and by going to meetings, that was like a silent admission, but I didn't make the verbal admission, and it kept me separated. And I didn't realize, just as that's that ignorance, in Buddhist terms, that um, I think that somehow I'm protecting myself, but really I'm limiting myself. I'm restricting my life. I'm, I'm making my life smaller by making my world smaller. Like, oh, I'll go to this meeting, but I'm not going to talk to any of you people. And I'm not going to get to know any of you people. And how beautiful it was when I started to talk to people, uh, you know, and one of the first things that happened, I shared at a meeting about, being at kind of a career crossroads and that I was looking for some kind of work in the music business. And somebody came up to me and they knew somebody who worked at a record company. And I went and got a job at a record company, just because I like raised my hand and told the truth. But of course made so many friends and all of those connections that all were about being honest and exposing myself. Um, yeah, the other thing here, having seen the benefit, even pleasure of letting go in this way, I wanted to share that uh, uplift. And again, this one's particularly mysterious that, you can go into a meeting feeling kind of crappy and raise your hand and talk about it and feel a whole lot better. Um, it's really the power of community. There is this power and again, I mean, I don't know that I need to figure that out. I'm sure there's ways to analyze it, but the thing is just to know it's there. I mean, I feel it talking to you guys this morning, like being with you. And, I'm in a way, there are times when it occurs to me that my teaching is just an excuse to share all the time. And it's kind of selfish in that way because, I'm not letting you guys share. So you could unmute yourself and just tell me to shut up and you want to say something. I'll let you do that in a minute or two. But I just wanted to look at a couple other things. So yeah, coming back to this Buddhist view, um, of not being attached to identity. I mean, that's one of the ways we could kind of see how this works. Uh, when we're part of the community, when we're not separate from the community, then there isn't this kind of solidness around our identity. Um, this also another line. There's like a bunch of lines in here that grabbed my attention. It's like, oh, that's a whole talk on that. With a more honest view of my past, it became easier to assess where I was in my life and what I might need to do to improve things. It's struck me how when I was drinking and using, I had one story about what that meant and how I was controlling it, and that once I got sober, that story completely changed, and how um, there's your life, and then there's the story you tell about your life, and those are two different things. The story you tell about your life is not your life. It's it's a way of trying to make sense and trying to understand things, and it turns out that that story is really important because it's the kind of the container of your experience. It's a lot of how you interpret your experience. It's how you interpret your memories, and then that applies to the choices you make in the present. And so uh, this is why it's really important to look at how the stories we're telling ourselves about ourselves. Because probably at the end of the day, none of them are totally true, you know. Um, so in a way, we're making a choice. And I mean, you can tell a complete fiction you can just make up a complete story that's not related to reality. I don't think that's helpful. But I think it's the way we pitch it more, and there are people that do that. But what's more relevant, I think, for most of us is, am I putting a positive view of it? Am I building something constructive out of the story? Or am I tearing myself down or boxing myself in? And that's where we are kind of making choices, and where we can kind of ask ourselves, is there another way to understand this? Is there a more helpful way to understand this? So there are some words for you. I appreciate you guys being here and listening, and I want to open it up for you guys to share or to engage in any way you like. You can just unmute and start to talk. Or
Hey, good morning, Kevin.
hi, Chris.
Hey, thank you for that. I guess I haven't heard you speak about the fifth step before, and I was just surprised. It very much reflected how my fifth step was. I was really scared, and but then once I revealed myself to my sponsor, um, it was an incredible relief, and this was my first fifth step, which I did after about a year of being sober,
Mm.
um, in 1990. But but I mean, I could suddenly accept. I mean, for the next 2 days, I think I was like on a cloud. I was just, I wasn't afraid to reveal myself to other people, and so it was an incredible relief. For me, though, I think that the fear between the first step and the fifth step were different. My fear in the first step was of losing the only thing I knew how to make life livable, right? This was my best friend, and this is how I managed life. My fear in the fifth step was fear of being rejected, you know? I mean, the real me being rejected. That was, for me, the benefit of making up lies, because if you rejected the false me, oh, well, okay. There was some insulation there, you know? But
Mhm.
but if you're rejected, if I told you me and you rejected that, that was really tough.
Yeah.
My other experience with my first fifth step was it wasn't until I spoke with Ron, my sponsor, that I understood the exact nature of my wrongs. So it was that conversation that really brought home and he circled things and he said, "Well, you see how this, and this are all this." I hadn't seen any of that until I talked
Mhm.
with another person. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. It's interesting how, getting that other perspective. Thanks, Chris. Hmm.
Hi, Kevin. It's Angela.
Hey, bye.
Hi. I'll try and keep it brief. I usually try to not say things, but let others speak. But I just a lot of things. One, thank you so much for being here always. I don't know why I've spent a kind of a hard few days, but I'm just really grateful that you show up. I'm not even sure why you're not at your house, but I just was like so appreciative in this moment that you show up, no matter what. And I get so much from these classes and from the, community, and um like every week I'm talking to my sponsor about something that you've said in your classes, or sharing with my home group, my fellowship in Uganda, about things that you've said. So just thank you. And then yeah, this stuff about perception, and yeah, just your honesty too, like the fact that, you wrote a whole book about your drinking and using and related it to the steps. But I really wanted to focus on this again, this idea of perception, and I mean the stories that we tell ourselves. And I see just how like this is my biggest challenge, and even in what you read today, like the fear, for me about sharing, the fear has always been, I guess, what people like, not being on, I guess it's something about like what people will think, or just like not wanting to take up space, or like even how I, prefaced my sharing with not wanting to. um, so that's really interesting, the fear that I have about that. And it's gotten a little bit better, I think, in this period, just because yeah, I'm just speaking up more. But and yeah, the other thing I also read with a few people last week from your book, Living Kindness. And then I actually read this passage to my sponsor because I'm on my 4th step again, and we kind of do the 4th and 5th step together. But in Living Kindness, in your last, in Not Born Again into This World, you talk about creating a self, or as some Buddhist teachers say, we can think of reincarnation as what happens every time we, quote, create a self, end quote, in a moment. So I almost read this, but I just right now, but it's just so, I just thought of it again as you were talking, just creating that self and the story and feeding that story, and how we have the power, with awareness, with sobriety, to stop those stories. And I guess, like, I think you were even talking about this in another class, but just like how recently, about how maybe it was at Spirit Rock just on Friday, but how now when we have sobriety, we kind of see that, the possibility, and we're not there's that, yeah, we're just much more clear about like what's possible. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming up, but I'm just so grateful for these teachings, and the way that you show up and pass them along to us. And yeah, I think there were other things, but I'll leave it there for now. Thank you. So
Right. Thanks, Angela. And just when I was thinking of getting a sub Friday night, now you made me feel guilty. So, Vicki, what?
Yeah, guilt.
Yeah,
What we're here for.
that's right.
Yeah, Vicki, alcoholic. So yeah, at the bar, I had no problem doing 5th steps. I would tell anybody anything drunk. It was very, very outrageous. And then, getting sober and doing my first inventory and sharing it, and learning from that. And then, a couple years later, doing another one and learning from that one too, and getting clearer. And, the story gets clearer, and the things that are kicking up the disease get clearer. And it's like the practice is the clarification. And certainly, man, in meditation, things get very clear sometimes, the arising, especially in retreat, the arising of the inventory is so helpful, so useful. And often, I don't know what I think till I see what I say, that little saying. And so like speaking a thing is also, a method of clarification. And I have a community, I have a home group, I have trusted advisors, I have a network, and this seems to be the power, that I'm willing to turn things over to in a lot of ways. I just volunteered with a youngster in AA to be the speaker seeker for our meeting. And that's interesting too. It's sort of like, okay, what are we looking for in a speaker? You know, we probably don't want, you know, only the drunkalogue. So it's just interesting to see, you know, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. You know, that kind of thing. In terms of you know, the possibilities, as Angela was talking about. You know, how can the story shift? Because yeah, that seems quite miraculous.
Mhm.
So thanks.
Yeah.
So
Thank
glad
you.
to be here. Really very glad. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. You're making me think I need to do another 5th step now. I don't know. Michael L.
Hey, Kevin. Hey, it's
Hi.
Michael in North Carolina. Hey, I don't want to take up too much time. I really want to, what I want to share with you is I actually, I haven't worked a 5th step yet. Today is actually an anniversary of sorts. I'm at 4 months of sobriety, so I'm still kind of new in the program. So I couldn't, I'm so grateful that I came to this, because I'm getting ready to wrap up my 4th step inventory, probably this week, and getting ready to work with my sponsor on the 5th step. And
wow.
yeah, so and to be honest, and honesty, wow, honesty that's come up really for me lately. Self honesty in particular is just so important to be, because not only have I been dishonest with so many people in my life, but I think what I'm really finding out in recovery is that I've been so dishonest with myself. And it's just so important for me to be honest. And that's what's come out in this 4th step. But I'd like to say that I'm really feeling like I don't really have a lot of fear or trepidation about sharing with my sponsor, because I got a good one. You know, I got a really good sponsor that I connect with. It's really just so amazing that I you know, that I found somebody that I can just be so open with. You know, we do things like twice a week, we read the big book together, and we talk about it and talk about other things. And I'm introducing him to my Buddhist studies, because I've been studying Buddhism for 5+ years. So that's kind of how I found you when I first got into recovery. So I don't really have a lot of fear. And the last thing I really wanted to say really is that I think, well, 2 things. I think telling the truth and being honest with everyone, and being and yourself, I think that's God's will. I think that's how we connect that whole, you know, that if we ever being Buddhist and we struggle with any kind of, you know, God, because that's how I found you, is because I struggled with that. And now I don't really struggle with that anymore. And I think that's God's will. It's God's will that this 5th step meeting was today. And that I think also that talking to people, that was one of the biggest changes in my recovery, when my sponsor and my therapist said, you need to call people. And I was so afraid to pick up the phone. It was so heavy. And now, you know, I talk to somebody every day. People call me now. Can you
Right.
believe it? They call
Yeah.
me now. And they're not just numbers. They're like so-and-so from so-and-so. So my point is, for that though, in my opinion, talking to people and sharing yourself, that gets you outside of yourself to do that. Ergo, no self, you know,
Yep.
self. And so that's really the way I see it. And so thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah. I want to go back. I can't stay very much longer, but someone did ask a question. Gail asked, how does telling our past personal story relate to non-self? It's a really good question. And I do have what I think is an answer to that question. How does telling our past personal story relate to non-self? The way I think of it is that when we actually tell our story, we get feedback about it, and we start to see that it's not unique. And when we see that it's not unique, we start to see how we are just like everybody else if it's not unique. And so we aren't so attached to it. You know, we aren't, it's like, oh, this is my story, I'm like this. And it's like, oh, I'm just a human being. I think we get that from it. And so that to me is the simple way of kind of connecting that. I also am teaching tonight for, I'm doing a class for Inside LA at 7 o'clock Pacific time, and it's called True Freedom. And then its subtitle is like Breaking Habits of Mind or something, Destructive Habits of Mind. I might have to rent like another room in order to do that, because we're both really busy here. And this is a really loud space we're in. Anyway, I don't know if you guys heard the noise that started, the voice that started to happen during the meditation, but that's why I didn't say very much during the meditation, because there was sound. So yeah, and people can make donations to Kevin Griffin if you want. Angela kindly puts that information in here, and it's also on my website. Yeah, I have a few things coming up that are, I believe I've got my website updated. So if you're interested, I'm doing a weekend with Vimalasara in December and a day long at Spirit Rock. So thanks for showing up. You know, this is what we do for each other, right? It's a very, I feel like you're a very reliable group. And, you know, because every once in a while I think, well, you know, maybe nobody will come this morning. But yeah, this is what we learn. This is what's so great about this, about recovery, that we learn about showing up. So it's November. I'm just going to look what day it is. November 17th. I don't know why it seems important, but it just feels like this is like the longest month of my life. And so if you want to unmute and say goodbye, go ahead before I turn it off. Okay.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Kevin.
Kevin.
Thanks,
Bye,
Kevin.
Kevin. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Kevin.
Thanks,
Namaste.
everybody.
Namaste.
Bye.